What is up, everybody? Welcome to Destination the Show, episode 74. It is Wednesday, April 2nd, 2025. My name is Jamie Cameron, joined as always by the one, the only Jeremy Nygaard, back at home on the Minnesota-Wisconsin border. How you doing, buddy?
I'm good. It's been snowing here, but I like you mentioned, I'm at home.
I'm
You, my
not.
friend, not at home.
I'm not at
And,
home.
and had an adventure on your way away from home.
I did. So I'm in Pennsylvania for work, as I am often. Folks will possibly recognize my beautiful lighting setup I have in this hotel room. It's a disaster. No, dude. Let me ask you this: do you like flying? Do you enjoy being on a plane,
Yeah.
or don't, or
Uh,
like neutral?
so I didn't get on my first flight until I was like 30 some years old.
That
That's for sure.
that's insane. What
And
what are you
so
talking about?
I grew up on a dairy farm and we didn't vacation. I don't know why that's funny. That's the truth. And so I was literally 33 years old the first time I got on a plane. So that was terrifying. But I love roller coasters. I love dropping. I love like all of the amusement park things. And so after I got over the initial like takeoff, flying was great and don't mind at all. Like I would fly tomorrow because I
Okay, that's
enjoy it.
fine. We need to dig into the dairy farm thing, by the way, because I feel like I kind of like made a joke once that like you grew up on a farm and I didn't realize it was actually true. That's wild. Okay, but here's the thing. You like roller coasters because when you're on a roller coaster, you like anticipate those twists and turns and ups and downs and like the loops and all the craziness, right? Like you don't know how fast it's going to come your way, but you know that you're in for like a ride, and you know that that ride has been constructed for you to like enjoy in a thrilling way and yet keep you safe at the same time. If you experience those roller coaster like sensations on a plane, that is a little more of an uneasy feeling.
If the oxygen thing falls down.
So
Because in movies, that's when it's like, oh, this could
yeah.
be bad.
So okay, so I fly quite a decent amount, and I like am very in between. I used to not like flying a lot, and now it's just like fine, whatever. Um, no one really likes turbulence. This was a very turbulent flight, and it was a small plane, so it's getting thrown about quite a bit, and that's fine. Anyway, we're coming into Newark, big busy airport, and it's just, feeling relieved, Jeremy, that this flight is almost over. And we are literally at, the moment where you're coming in for landing and you're anticipating that, like, the touch and,
Touchdown.
like, kind of like the bounce.
Yep.
So I'm anticipating touchdown. And suddenly the plane veers up at an uncomfortably steep angle and just zooms off towards the Manhattan skyline. And I was like, okay. And so in moments like this, what I realized, because it hasn't happened to me before, like clearly this is an aborted landing. And so you look around and you rely on other people's faces for your kind of cues, right? Of like, how should I feel about this? Other people were not pleased. Other people were uneasy. Some
Okay.
other people were just like straight up scared. I think it was like the steepness of the ascent suddenly. And then here's the thing that bugs me: about 5 to 7 minutes later, it was fine because it was very clear we're going around in a big circle. We're going to come back and do the whole thing again. That's what eventually happened, and we had to put up with more turbulence and whatever. They didn't give a single update about the reason for aborting the landing. The pilot didn't say a single word. The pilot's little friend, whatever they're called, co-pilot, they didn't say a single word. Not one um not one staff on the not one staff on the plane said a single word about what happened and why that happened. And I just found that whole thing perturbing because to me that said I was in mortal peril and um avoided death by mere feet.
Jamie. Jamie. When did this happen?
I don't know, like Tuesday afternoon.
Yesterday?
Yesterday.
Yeah, they don't
Sure.
have to say anything. They don't have to say anything at all.
But you should say
Hey,
something
hey,
though.
April Fools.
That's poor.
It was just a joke. They
That's
were
not
just messing.
funny. I don't appreciate it. And you know what? I saw the pilot afterwards. The pilot did not look like he was enjoying the joke. So I don't know. It's going to be a mystery. Didn't enjoy it. Did not enjoy my flight, but here we are. Now I'm tired and cranky.
But
But
you
I'm
were going to
excited
be,
because I'm going home tomorrow. And tomorrow's
yeah,
the Twins home opener. So
and you were going to be tired and cranky regardless because you don't
that
like
is true.
going to Pennsylvania.
That is true. That is true. 100%. Anyway, that's my flying story. Let's talk baseball, man. But we're going to do housekeeping stuff first. The number one thing that you can do to support our show is to like and subscribe on your preferred podcast platform of choice, especially if you're kind enough to leave us a 5-star rating and or review. You can find all of our episodes on YouTube. The handle is @Destination the Show. If you want to get in touch with us, we enjoy that very much, as some people have kindly taken us up on today. You can get in touch on Twitter @DTS_pod1 or on Blue Sky @Destination the Show. The email for the show, if you want to send in a question the old-fashioned way, is destinationtheshow, all one word, @gmail.com. Send us a question. Get in touch. We really enjoy hearing from people. You know what, Jeremy? So what I wanted to do before we talk about our kind of main topic for the day is to talk about the Twins and how they've started the season. But I gotta say, things are looking a little bit better, at least, than when I put this running order together. Because when I put this running order together, they were 0-4, having gotten swept in St. Louis and then gotten blown out by the White Sox. And we had some frustrated text exchanges. So what are your impressions of the Twins now that we're through 6 games and they're in a 5-way 2-4 tie for first place in the AL Central?
I mean, I feel like the Twins are already talking about upping their playoff ticket prices, right? No, but seriously, the weird thing about April baseball and March baseball is there's so many day games. And so, like, when I get home, the opener, I believe, was already out of hand. And then, they didn't play Friday. Saturday happens. Sunday happens, which are day games during the weekends. And I have them on the background, and it's like, oh, God, they're awful.
Yeah.
And then you text me Monday, and I don't remember what it was. Basically,
you were like driving. You were like, I'm driving a van. What's going on in the Twins game? And I was like, they're down 9-0 after 3 innings.
I get the season's over text, and I'm like, what's even happening? Like, is this really happening when I'm not watching? And by the time I got home, the game was over. And so then yesterday they had a night game, which feels like Major League regular season baseball.
Yeah.
And for 5 innings, it was also awful.
It was rough.
And then, like tends to happen in a baseball season, things turn, and then it's like all is right in the world.
Yeah.
The pitching being bad was unexpected.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe not Paddock so much, but Ober should be better. But he was bad in his first start last year, so
yeah,
it's easy to really give up early, but you're going to have awful 4-game stretches or 4.5-game stretches 5, 6, 7, 8 times during the year. Yep. You're going to have great 8-game stretches a couple of times during the year. And it's really easy to overreact to those stretches when they're the only stretch you've had, right? So I feel like your flight, a lot of turbulence early.
Oh,
right?
Okay. Smooth.
And then all of a sudden, like, okay, now things are going to be okay.
Wow.
Pablo was better today.
Very good.
The Twins, let's see how they play at home tomorrow. It's going to be awful weather.
Hey, who else has been awful though? The Houston Astros. The 2-4 Houston Astros coming to town.
Right. So it'll be interesting to see just how Correa got his first 2 hits tonight.
Yep.
Harrison Bader's really been the stud. It's like Bader, Castro, and then everybody else has been bad. Maybe I'm missing a guy or 2 in there, but it's one of those deals where it's like it's just so easy to freak out over 1 turn through the rotation. Now one turn plus 1. But if if they would have won their first 2, you'd have been like, oh, this team's great, and then lost your last 4, you'd feel the exact same way.
Yep.
As you did after the first 4 games. So I don't know that there's a lot of things to really talk about. I did text you, during the fourth loss, like, okay, when does Rocco's seat actually get warm? Because if you lose 8-9 games to start the season, that has to be a real discussion. You're 2-4. There's no talk about it at all. But that's the type of overreaction that happens in front offices
Yeah.
early in a season. So right now the guys have kind of calmed a little bit, and they come home after a 2-4 road trip. Which would we be alarmed at a 2-4 road trip ever during the year?
I think no. I think the thing that, I mean, you hit on all the important points, right? Which is that, it's a bad 4-game stretch to open the season when everyone's been looking forward to the beginning of the season for such a long time. I would also throw in the fact that you're playing two not good opponents, really. Like the Cardinals might be fine. They might even push for a wild card spot, but they're not like a dominant team. And then the White Sox lost 121 games last year, and so it's probably, well, and now it definitely is, but it's impossible to replicate what they did against the White Sox last year. I think they were 12-1 against them, right? But when I looked at the Brewers, and we should touch on them real quick because they've been up and down too. I watched the Brewers get absolutely shelled to the tune of 9 home runs against the Yankees in Yankee Stadium, 3 of which were hit by Aaron Judge. And my thought was like, yeah, this is rough. And they're playing the Yankees in Yankee Stadium, and that can happen. Whereas I think part of the thing that added to expectations for the Twins to get at least off to an average start, or we're playing the Cardinals and the White Sox. Those are both bad teams. Then you have a good team come to town, the Astros.
Right.
But they're coming off a sweep against the Giants, who aren't really that good either. So let me ask you something else, though, Jeremy. And then I want to touch on something on the minor league side here real quick. Any concern about Ober's performance? You brought it up, right? Had a bad first start in 2024, also in the state of Missouri. I think he actually lasted an inning longer this time around than he did last time around. What was also true, though, was his velocity was significantly down in this start. He was like sitting 89 with a fastball. It had been down for the past 2 starts of spring training, mostly sitting under 90 miles per hour with his fastball. Simeon Richardson's velocity was also down yesterday. He was sitting around 91.5, 91.6 with the fastball. And a big piece of his story in 2024, of course, other than coming up and posting really consistently for a Twins rotation who needed it badly, was that, he had reworked his mechanics, altered his arm angle, and was suddenly posting 94 and 95 consistently with a fastball. So do you pay much attention to any of those early season velocity fluctuations? Or are you not concerned about Ober, SWR, and anyone else who's a little up and down to start the year?
Yeah, I'm not really going to get concerned about anybody until probably May, just because it's like the weather. I mean, you went from warm weather to cold weather. Could that be a thing? Sure. You went from really ramping up to now trying to kind of stay where you have that ability to throw 70 pitches or whatever. There's just a lot of things that I would like to see and have it seen. Give a few turns to the rotation 3-4 times before I really make any assumptions or can jump to any conclusions, because I do think these guys have a track record of being successful Major League Baseball players.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to, like I said, jump to any conclusion that's going to suggest that these guys are injured or not right. I want to give that time. If May 1st rolls around and it's still the same, then that's where I would maybe start having some discussions.
Yep, that's fair. And so let's transition from non-concern to whatever the opposite of concern is, celebration. And let's talk about Zebby Matthews real quick before we dig into minor league rosters, Jeremy, because the Saints have only managed 3 games due to various weather shenanigans. Zebby followed David Festa. David Festa pitched 5 shutout innings to start the season. Zebby followed up with 5 shutout innings to start the season. Andrew Morris followed that up with 5 shutout innings to start his season tonight. I mean, I want to touch on Zebby Matthews real quick because while Simeon Woods Richardson's fastball sat at 91.6 against the White Sox, Zebby Matthews' fastball sat 97.5. That was the average, by the way, in his start yesterday. Hit a new PR fastball velo of 99.2 miles per hour. His cutter's all the way up to 95, slider at 91. I mean, having said we're not going to get too disheartened by players on the big league side who are seeing fluctuations in their velocity, how excited should we be about Zebby Matthews essentially carrying over from spring training what appears to be a decently significant velocity bump, not just to the fastball, but across his whole arsenal of 1 to 2 miles per hour. And were he to hold these velocity ranges, this would put him absolutely in the upper echelon in terms of velo of major league starting pitchers when and not if he gets back in the Twins rotation at some point soon.
Yeah, I think when guys start doing things new and then maintain those things, that's a reason to get excited, because they're new and they're improved. If he was throwing 89 right now, I'd be like, okay, well, let's give it some time. I don't anticipate that he's going to be throwing 99 every game, right? The crazy thing was it was one of his later throws.
Yeah, it was like the 4th inning or something,
which is kind of nuts. But I do think when guys start doing things like this, and the hard part was I don't know how you were watching that game. I was watching it on TV. I didn't see the radar gun posting anywhere on the broadcast.
I was watching on MiLB TV and they had it up for every pitch, and then I also had Savant up to double check the gun.
So I must have just missed that because I had that on. I watched the first 2 Saints games, did not watch tonight's game, but I mean he looked good just from passing the eye test, right? And so that's also why when you talked about Ober and Woods Richardson, like I have a little bit less concern because Festa and Matthews have had success in the major leagues. We've talked about the depth. And so if it's like dead arm and the guy needs a few skips of the rotation, then yeah, bring in any of these guys up. And so, but I do like, back to your point, when a guy starts doing stuff like this with Zebby, 99 in
ridiculous
the 4th inning, when he was not, he's really like the old school pitch to contact type, right? He's just not going to walk guys. He's going to make you get yourself out. And then he's gassing up 99 with his fastball.
Not anymore, buddy.
It's crazy. And so that is reason to be excited because you don't see guys throwing 90-mile-an-hour sliders every day.
Nope.
Well, not starting pitchers.
You definitely don't.
It's fun. It's fun. It's a sweet development. So there's reason to be excited, but again, it's one start, and he could very easily follow this up with one that doesn't look right. So give it a couple turns, and we'll see where he is. But I think it's pretty obvious that the Twins have a great depth, and these Festa and Matthews for sure probably don't deserve to be here. That's just kind of where they fall in the pecking order.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I remember, and I wanted to bring up Jeremy, and I'm hesitant to do this, but I do remember having a conversation with you where we talked about and compared Festa with Matthews. And we said, we played this game. We kind of did a thought exercise of if we project forward 3 years, who do you expect to be better? And I think both of us specifically said Matthews for a couple of reasons. One, the frame, right? Bigger, more physical guy, 6'5", with good weight to his frame. We also talked about the diversity of his arsenal, just having 5 pitches versus having 3. And Festa's since added a sinker, but that's a new pitch there. And it does seem like Matthews is let's put it this way, just as a fun hypothetical. Let's say Ober is pitching 89 and he has a dead arm and needs to go on the injured list, heaven forbid. Who are you calling up, Festa or Matthews, and what's your rationale?
Matthews. because I well, I think the Twins probably call up whoever is closest in their rotational plans.
Hmm.
You were bigger on Festa. He did have some great games last year. Matthews kind of wasn't as great later. I think you could make a case for either one. I probably call Matthews up just because I think he could. That actually is
It's
really
so
tough.
tough, right? I think that's a good problem to have, right? The fact that, let's put it this way, and maybe you agree or disagree. I feel like when Zebby came up last year, he had way less like seasoning in AAA than David Festa. He was not ready, and he needed some run
Yep.
in AAA. And so to have two guys that you could potentially feel confident calling up and feeling confident that they could get outs, like I wonder how many organizations for whom David Festa or Zebby Matthews would be their number one pitching prospect. I'd have to guess at least 10, maybe more.
Yeah, I would think so. I would go with Zebby if I had to make the choice, all things being equal. What would you do?
I just think it's hard for me not to be a prisoner of the moment, right? And say, like, we back in the day when Zebby they first revamped his pitch mix, we put out the thing. I think we talked about it on here. Oh, his pitch mix is the same as Garrett Cole's pitch mix.
You love that
And
comp.
well, people obviously interpreted that irresponsibly. It was like Jamie's guaranteeing that Zebby Matthews is going to become Garrett Cole, but the velocity is like reminiscent. The velocity.
I'm going to clip just that part where you guarantee it.
Yeah, there you go. The velocity is now reminiscent of Garrett Cole, though.
Right.
And the pitch mix is similar too. And so, of course, that's not to say it's going to play up in as dominant a fashion, but it's hard for me not to be kind of a prisoner of the moment and say, wow, I would love to see Zebby take two, knowing that he's at a velo. He's still throwing strikes. I don't know how much you can glean from this, but just like he looks so confident in his start at St. Paul the other day. But you could also, I think, make an argument and say, actually, you know what Zebby Matthews needs? 10 starts at St. Paul just to really get locked in and like completely ready so that when he comes back to the majors, he's back for good. And he hopefully doesn't have any more humps and bumps to work through. So I can make an argument for either. I'd honestly feel comfortable with either. I think from purely an upside perspective, I think Zebby's maybe taking a lead for me at the moment, but two super intriguing guys, and I'm glad they're both in the Twin system.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I think they both will have plenty of opportunities to make starts throughout this year.
For sure. Okay. Here's what we're going to do, Jeremy. We're going to jump into some minor league roster previews. So I've been looking forward to this. We are on the cusp, on the eve, not quite the eve, but most of minor league ball starts on Friday, and we have rosters to talk through. The only one we'd really seen before a day or so ago was the Saints roster. So we're going to walk through them level by level. We'll start with the Saints, and then we'll go down level by level all the way to low A. And we're going to try and do this in a systematic way as possible whilst also not recording for 3.5 hours. So we'll cycle through some questions for each roster. We'll start with like your general reactions and any surprises. Then we'll dig into like strengths, weaknesses in terms of player demographics on a particular roster. And then I'm going to ask you, and I will also kind of highlight someone with something to prove on that roster and maybe someone you're tipping to impress. And the person you're tipping to impress doesn't have to be someone who's off the radar, right? It can be top prospect who's, newly minted at this particular level. So before we do that, what we'll do is go through some highlights position by position of a particular roster, and then I'll turn it over to you for your breakdown. So we'll start with the Saints. On the pitching side, you've got David Festa, Zebby Matthews, Andrew Morris, Marco Raya, Corey Lewis, who pitched tonight and struck out 4 of the 5 batters he faced, piggybacking Andrew Morris. Alex Spees, who's interesting in that he was a free agent signing for spring training, who throws over 100, struggle throwing strikes. You got Cody Funderburk on that staff. Kyle Bischoff is a right-handed sinker slider guy we've highlighted as a possible bullpen candidate for the Twins at some point. The catching core at St. Paul, you've got Jair Carmago, Diego Cartaya, and Jefferson Morales listed at catcher there. He's going to see plenty of time in the outfield. He had a really good spring training for the Twins. In the infield group, you've got Peyton Eels currently on the injured list. Luke Keeschel already has an 800 OPS at AAA. Severino, Anthony Prado, and then in the outfield, Austin Martin, Carson McCusker, all 6'8" of Carson McCusker, and Emmanuel Rodriguez, also owner of a OPS north of 800 through their first 3 games. So general reaction to that Saints roster, Jeremy, how do you feel about it? Any surprises for you?
Yeah, I when I saw that one, I looked through it and I'm like, okay, this would be a fun one to go watch.
Yeah.
Right. Strong rotation. You didn't mention Travis Adams.
Travis Adams
He really kind of rounds out that rotation. He's on the 40-man, so I think he, depending on need, he could certainly get a call up as well. But it's a mix of kind of the high end guys that we talked about earlier, and then the Marco Rayas, the Corey Lewises. I really like that pitching staff, and I think
good.
Through 3 games, it's been pretty obvious that it's good. The one thing that surprised me a little bit was that Keeschel moved up right away, right? I think if given, where's he going to start, I would have said AA, just because he did miss that time. Obviously was really good last year, but you don't want to put in a guy in a position and then not have him succeed. Excuse me, but he's playing well. It's hard to say like strengths and weaknesses as far as like positions. I think pitching is strength. Prospect status, like having top prospects, is a strength.
Yep.
But even looking at that lineup, I'm like, okay, I want to watch these first 3 batters bat: Austin Martin, Luke Keeschel, Erod, and then I didn't really care about the rest of the lineup, right? Not that I didn't watch it, but it's like those are the 3 guys that I'm really
for sure
interested in, because I think those are the guys that could certainly help this Major League Baseball team this summer.
Yep. For sure would agree with that. And dude, I mean, that is a gauntlet. So I've watched almost all of the Saints games so far, and Keeschel and Emmanuel Rodriguez back to back is tough, not only because you have 2 good hitters and they're very different hitters. It's a much more like hit tool forward profile with Keeschel and a much more power forward profile with Emmanuel Rodriguez, who missed a grand slam by like 10 feet foul today. But those guys are both extremely patient and extremely selective hitters. And so I've seen them like walk back to back already, come up with guys on base. And it's just like a nightmare situation, I think, if you're an opposing pitcher who is struggling to throw strikes, because Keeshel's going to find a gap and Erod is just going to take a walk. 100% agree with what you said about the pitching staff. I mean, here's an interesting question for you, I suppose, right? So we've got this pitching staff of Festa Morris, Zebby, Travis Adams, Marco Raya. That's the rotation to start. What is the over-under are you setting for the number of those guys that makes at least one big league start in 2025? If I told you the over-under is 3.5, are you taking the over or under?
Well, that's where I would. And I would probably take the over, just because of how the starting rotations work, right? And it might be Travis Adams making 1 spot start. It might be Andrew Morris, or someone on the 40-man getting a doubleheader call up to start a game. Yep. And so I would say I would take the over on that. But it's not like the old over where it's like, it's going to be more than 3.5. even though there's not 3.5 guys suited to do this, right? Like
Right.
Simmons with Richardson making an April start last year or 2 years ago was
Last year.
not by design. Was that
Right.
that was
It was
that
last year. It was his rookie season. Yep.
against the Nationals? I thought was that
Oh, when he debuted, that may have been the season before.
I don't know. I was there. It was cold. And it seems like more than a year ago. But it's like he was called up to make that spot start, step back down, and it was like, okay, well, he had to do it.
Yep.
We've seen a number of that type of thing happen over the the last however many years. But it's like if David Festa get called up to make one start, that you have a major league caliber pitcher making that start.
Sure do.
Zebby Matthews, for sure, major league caliber pitcher. Andrew Moore, someone that we're ready to see. Marco Rye, someone that we're hopeful to see. Corey Lewis, someone that it's like, oh, you got this knuckleball, let's see it. And so that to me is really fun. To quick answer your two other questions, I think Peyton Neals has something to prove because
like that.
he kind of become everyone's Cinderella story. Obviously, he cannot prove it this year and still get more opportunities. I think Junior Severino is kind of at the end of his opportunity to impress or to prove. If he doesn't prove it, I don't see him coming back. I'm going to tip Austin Martin to impress because I do think that he's going to become Willie Castro next year.
Interesting.
And I think he's got everything. I mean, he's made some good plays on balls in left field. Now he moved into second base. We know that he can play center. He's gonna have to hit a little bit.
Do we know that he can play center?
Gonna pinch.
I mean,
just like Willie Castro, right?
He can stand in center. I don't know that he can play center.
Great. Well, I'll take that. Like he can be
okay.
a cheaper version of Willie Castro.
Sure.
And I think he'll have a really good year this year.
I like those. Those are good calls. I love the Payne Eels call. I think it's such a bummer, Jeremy, that like he is on the shelf to start the year. It sounds like he had surgery on a cartilage issue in his knee, and we don't have a timetable yet for when he's going to return. Two other guys.
That would not be quick.
You would think, right? But they said, I guess, in a minor issue, and I think it was Lucas Seehafer, who does all the injury updates for us, was like, there's no such thing as a minor cartilage issue in your knee.
Right. Yeah, that's scary.
Two other things I'll highlight is things that are potentially interesting, and I guess they'll be my something to prove, something to impress picks. Something to prove for me, Carson McCusker is interesting in that he is a large human who hits for massive power and hits right-handed. And so maybe you have a future as a like first base / right-handed platoon outfield bat if you show that you can hit at AAA. And he's much older. I want to say he's 26, maybe even 27. He was a free agent signing for the Twins, another one of those great finds like Payne Eel. So he's someone to me with something to prove, and that would just be really fun. I think I told you this already. I saw him taking a bat in spring training from like 2 rows back, and the bat just looked like a matchstick. He's just like enormous. And then the tipping to impress, this is kind of a cop-out. I'm hoping it's one of the catchers, right? So Jair Camargo and Diego Cartaya feel like they are auditioning this season for Ryan Jeffers' backup next year. And I'm guessing if you're the Twins, what would be great is inserting a cost-controlled backup catcher who you feel confident can catch, who at least could be average defensively, who you're not paying $10 million to like you are this year with Christian Vasquez, who's out of contract this year. So that feels like some of this may be relevant for the Major League team in 2026.
I love that you said out of contract like we're talking about soccer.
Yeah. How would you say it? Who's out of contract, right?
On an expiring deal, pending free agent.
Okay, there you go. I'm not from here, man. What do you want from me?
Out of contract is 100% a soccer term.
Out of contract. Okay. All right. Let's move on. Oh, wait, quick. One more shout out because Josiah sending a question about this, and shout out to him for always sending us really fun questions. He said, "Are you guys going to talk much about coaching staff changes?" Which we're probably not for the sake of time today. We'll come back to something he said a little bit later, but did want to shout out official friend of the show, I think, Jonas Lovin, who was the pitching coach the last 2 years for Cedar Rapids and moved all the way up to AAA and will be in St. Paul this season. So it's kind of cool because he's moved up with this 2022 cluster of college arms that have been really, really great. So congrats to Jonas on a double promotion.
So will Jonas be more in the dugout or more in the bullpen? Like, where do we sit when we go to Saints games so we can be like, yo,
so we can say we know that guy. Yeah. Good question. Dugout, I'm guessing. But looking forward to that. All right, let's move on to the Twins AA affiliate, the Wichita Wind Surge. This is a very interesting roster in my mind, full of guys with something to prove, especially on the hitting side, but we'll run through some notable names. On the pitching side, Ricky Castro, someone I want to talk about. CJ Culpepper, who was the fourth member of that vaunted 2022 cluster of college arms. Kyle Jones, who has been a little bit lost in the shuffle and forgotten. Christian McLeod, Pearson Ole, some guy named Connor Prelip, who is starting for the Wind Surge on Friday night in their opening game. Catchers at that level, you've got Noah Cardenas and Andrew Cassetti. Infielders of note, Rubel Cespedes, Jarrell Ortega, Ben Ross, Aaron Sabato, Tanner Schobel, all guys, I think to a man except Rubel Cespedes, who are repeating in AA. And then in the outfield, names of note, Kalai Rosario, and some guy named Walker Jenkins. Jeremy, your reaction to the Wind Surge roster, surprises, prospects of note, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, that one, when I saw that on whatever day it was that came out Monday, when I saw the email, I'm like, oh, that makes sense. Strong prospect wise, right? You have Walker Jenkins, who is the number one prospect in the organization and a top 3 prospect in all of baseball. And Connor Prelip, who's arguably the top pitching prospect in the organization. I don't know. I'm curious to see how he's handled, right? Because
Prelip?
Yeah. Because I think we've talked kind of on the Marco Raya, get a couple innings. But I don't think there was ever the thing with Raya where it's like, okay, well, if he's dominant, you can fast track him.
Yeah.
And Prelip obviously can be. And all the stuff from the spring, he's been nasty.
Yeah.
Nasty. So, I jokingly tweeted a month ago, like he's the love child of Francisco Liriano and Johan Santana. And it's like his stuff is actually, when right, a mix of Francisco Liriano and Johan Santana, which is
quite good.
Insane. It's absolutely insane. Go ahead.
Wait, can we talk about Prelip for a second? Because I think I have something to add about his usage.
Will I ever say no to that?
Yeah. No. Can we talk about rhetorical question, Jeremy? So Prelip, just to add some context, in his last 3 minor league starts prior to breaking camp, pitched around 10 innings and struck out 20 batters in those 10 innings, which is absurd. I think the other things of note with him are that his changeup has really come along. And so you're really looking at his fastball, which is now touched 99. You're really looking at potentially 3+ pitches with above average control, which is crazy stuff. And to your question about usage, here's what I think they're going to do. He's going to pitch once per week, right? Because all of these clubs are going to operate with a 6-man rotation because they play 6 days a week and have, for the most part, 6-game series. So he's going to pitch on Friday. It'll be like college. He's the Friday night starter for Wichita. He's going to be on a pitch count. He'll start the game. His pitch count will be 45 for his first few outings. And they're very slowly going to trickle that up. To your question and point, I think if he's dominant, you move him aggressively up to St. Paul, because I am pretty confident that he could dominate in St. Paul if you started him there now, honestly. But there's no reason to rush. And it seems clear from the org that his path to big league playing time this year is in the bullpen.
Right.
And so the question becomes, what is the over under on a debut for Connor Prelip? Let's say, which is a silly hypothetical to play, he is healthy to start the season and is continuing to be dominant at Wichita and then St. Paul. What is ballpark and over under you're giving me for when he might debut with a big league team in the bullpen and just go lights out for an inning at a time?
July 15th.
Sure.
You're not going to take the over or the unders, the before or the after?
I don't think I would go sooner than that. I think that's like about right. I think like you want to get major league innings out of Prelip this year. Like he's ready, his stuff is ready, assuming he stays on track and healthy, and you're working to maintain his arm. I still personally feel convicted that it is a good idea if you can to in 2026 see if he could start, because that feels like a extremely compelling possibility. But I think somewhere in July feels about right.
So the reason I said the day that I said is I would want to get him up if the team's competing for a playoff spot. I want to get him up. I want to get him in that position and see him for a few weeks before investing potentially in the bullpen at the trade deadline. If they're not in contention, I don't know that that's important to bring him up and get any usage out of him.
Okay.
Because I would use him maybe more sporadically just to get him healthy for next year, like you said, as a starting pitcher. Because if you're not in contention, now you're looking to make moves and sell. And so I don't know what pitchers that could potentially be, but I do know that if the Twins are sellers in July and they have David Festa, Zebby Matthews waiting in the wings, only Paddock as a pending free agent, you could move a starting pitcher and get a decent haul for him, right?
Good.
Nelson Cruz at 40 years old resulted in Joe Ryan. So that my answer is more based on the fact that I think he'll be they'll be competing, or at least looking to compete in August.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Let's cover the last two questions for the win surge here, Jeremy. Who has something to prove, and who are you tipping to impress on this roster?
So for me, the ones that definitely have something to prove: Aaron Sabato, Tanner Schobel, and Clyde Rosario. Like, this is, if they want to have a chance in this organization, it's got to happen for them now. I do think that the tip to impress, it's going to be Walker Jenkins. Like, that's easy, right? It's going to be Connor Prelip. I think that's easy. I want to see Andrew Cassetti's going to hit. And like you said with the St. Paul catchers, is he capable of catching? Mm-hmm. Because I don't know that he'll ever fit in as like that backup catcher type.
Yeah.
But if he has any ability to catch, it gives him that much more flexibility. And Ortega too, I think is a guy that will prove something with his bat, but has to answer questions about where he fits defensively. Because I also think Joel Ortega will hit the ball, but is he more than just a second baseman or a DH? That remains to be seen.
Yeah, I think I'm going to throw in Ricardo Olivar, who I, for some reason, omitted from this list as someone with something to prove. And the reason I think that is because I think of him as a higher caliber prospect than some of the repeaters that we just mentioned, who I think maybe are getting towards like organizational depth at this point. And Olivar has an established track record of hitting everywhere and then struggled, albeit in a pretty small AA sample last year. I think the thing about him is he's listed on the roster as a catcher/outfielder. he's not a catcher. He's not he's not a catcher. He's not going to catch. He's definitely not going to catch the major league level. And he's also not great defensively in a corner outfield spot. And so he's just going to have to hit if he's going to be successful. And he's kind of a sleeper prospect from last year who crushed at high A and then just really struggled at Wichita. And so I would offer him as someone with something to prove, simply because I think of him as like he's in the teens tier of Twins prospects for me, and some of these other guys are not. And then I'll give you a dark horse for someone to impress. Ricky Castro is a pitcher the Twins picked up as a free agent signing out of Tulane. He's an older prospect, but like many Twins pitching acquisitions, added some velocity, unlocked some things mechanically with him, and he's definitely gotten some fans and some good reviews in the organization. So he's a wild card for me to do well for the win search.
So we can't move on without mentioning one of the biggest questions, or maybe not biggest questions, but like most fun question to be answered is, how do the Twins handle Walker Jenkins if he's healthy and performing like the third best prospect in baseball?
That is so fun. You're right. And my guess is probably one that's going to bore people. I think they'll give him a decently long run in AA, simply because he's been interrupted so far in his pro career with muscular stuff that has sidelined him for a significant period of time. Like his strained hamstring on the opening day last year, I think put him out for like 2 months. It ended up being, you've got guys ahead of him in AAA in the pecking order for outfield time between Emmanuel Rodriguez, possibly even Keishel, right? I think we've said that he's slotted for second base, but he's another guy who could be the bat first version of Willie Castro at some point. Right. So I think the likely outcome for Walker Jenkins, even if he's scorching, is that he gets a long run at AA through like April, May, June, gets to AAA for the second half of the season. Then you see what he has there, and you just wait for the right moment. If he's like really incandescent and the power suddenly comes in and he's just mashing home runs all over the place, we revisit that conversation. But I think this will be his age 20 season. He's starting in AA. He's hit everywhere he's gone. He has a really strong all-around skill set. And are you going to be a like 15 to 20 homer guy or a 25 to 30 home run guy is really the last question that's going to be answered about his profile. And I think he's still a little bit too young for us to have a definitive answer for that yet.
No, I think all that's fair.
Okay, let's move on. Talk about Cedar Rapids. I'm just gonna come out with a take, Jeremy. This is my favorite roster of all the Twins affiliates. We'll go through some highlights here on the pitching side, and in particular, I would add on the hitting side. I think this group is really fun. On the pitching side, Charlie Soto is going to start their first game on Friday night. Ty Langenberg, former guest of the show, who had a really strong and consistent 2024 season. Ross Dunn, left-handed pitcher, spent I actually think the entire 2024 season at Fort Myers. Tanner Hall, favorite of yours. Jose Olivares, a little bit of an under-the-radar guy. He throws really hard. The catching core there is Nate Baez and Kadeem Zhao. Zhao taken in the third round of the 2024 draft. Then here's your infield at Cedar Rapids. Kalen Culpepper, Kyle DeBarge, Billy Amick, Rain Doncone, and Danny DeAndrade. And then the outfielders, Jaime Ferrer, Brandon Winokur, Caden Kendall, and Gabby Gonzalez. Jeremy, your reaction to the Cedar Rapids roster. What are your thoughts here, man?
First thought when I saw it was, how are they going to play all those infielders? Right? I mean, you look at that because you put Winokur in the outfield.
Yeah.
Winokur plays a ton in the infield. So I'm like, okay, so DeBarge plays some center, probably. DeAndrade was hurt most of the year, so maybe they slowly get him back in. Amick probably has to play first. Culpepper's playing short. Like there's too many guys. Like I want to see DeBarge in the infield, but to get all the guys in, so it's like, are we gonna see a guy like Billy Amick getting time in right field? Are we going to see a guy like Kalen Culpepper sliding over to third base so we can see DeBarge play some short? Like,
Yeah.
there's going to have to be, and they do it all the time. Like, I watch Max Kepler play first base in Cedar Rapids and look like a Gold Glover because they move guys around. So that was my initial response, and kind of like looking at Wichita, like, are any of these guys, were they good enough to be able to be moved up?
Yeah.
Because Wichita doesn't really have a great set of infielders.
Yeah. And that, I mean, I think you've hit on the thing, right? Like, the infield crop is so strong. And that's one of the challenges, right? Is Culpepper is the only one of the 2024 draftees in the infield who's made it to Cedar Rapids. And he had he slowed down a little bit at the end of last season. I think what we heard from the Cedar Rapids coaching staff is that Amick and Don Cohn are going to split time between first and third base.
Okay.
Then I'm assuming you have Denny DeAndrade and Kalen Culpepper splitting time at short. And then maybe DeBarge is playing a good amount of second. I think Winokur is going to play quite a lot of center field, even though he's listed as both an infielder and outfielder. So I guess one of my questions for this roster, and we've talked about this a little bit, right, is kind of what you alluded to. Wichita doesn't necessarily have the strongest group of hitters aside from top prospects in the organization and maybe Olivar. You need a couple guys from the 2024 draft class to do really well this season, because that's going to fill in your farm system, right? So in 6 to 8 months, Keishel's going to graduate, Erod's going to graduate. Not far behind them are going to be Walker Jenkins and Connor Prelip. You need some guys to become guys who are going to be established top 10 guys. And it feels like, and maybe you disagree with me, but it feels like at least like 2 of the infielders on this list have to take a step forward and like really mash at Cedar Rapids.
Yeah. And I would put Zhao in that group too.
Sure.
Because I think, I mean, all things considered, he might end up being the best hitter out of this group.
Yep.
And it is a really fun group. And Winokur Winokur and Amick to me are just different types of prospects.
Yeah, so different.
Because there's just the range of outcomes is so extreme. Culpepper, you got to assume, would be the first to move up then, right? If he,
you would think. You would think, just based on the fact that he was their first round pick. He made it there already at the end of last season. He crushed Fort Myers, and the others didn't necessarily, although Amick in particular heated up down the backstretch. And I think you could make a strong case, and we'll move to the outfield now, and then we'll touch on the pitching. You could make a case, I think, that what Brandon Winokur did in his age 19 season in Fort Myers was really, really impressive. I want to say 15 home runs, around a 740 OPS, just really held his own consistently. You can see the athleticism on display. And so I feel like this is a big year for Winokur. I think he did a little better than I expected at Fort Myers, honestly. Like, the swing and miss was manageable. The strikeout rate was manageable. He's a tantalizing prospect. I find this outfield really interesting. I've been all the way out on Gabby Gonzalez since day one. The other 2 guys I like quite a bit. Kendall, I think, is a sneaky good hitter. That's like a very hit tool reliant profile for him. And then Jaime Ferrer is really interesting because he's a little bit of a tweener type of prospect. Like, his last season at Florida State, he hit 22 home runs, but he's a hyper aggressive hitter. Like, I want to say his walk rate has never been higher than like 5%. And so the Twins have done really well with improving guys' swing decisions, Luke Keishel being a prime example. So is Ferrer a guy who can take a step forward with his swing decisions, become a little bit more patient and selective at the plate, because I think he has above average in-game power, and he would be an interesting guy to watch. He was a little bit under the radar for me this season.
Yep. As far as other questions, guys that have things to prove, I think when you mentioned Gabby Gonzalez, he's the biggest one on this roster. Came in, with showing up on the top 100 list last year, which you were like, that's ridiculous. But he's got something to prove. And DeAndrade, I was really high on him at Fort Myers 2 years ago. Missed most of last year, almost all of
Yeah.
last year, and you just got to get it done.
Yep.
And Amick in a little bit different way because I mentioned it before. I think Amick is going to crush in Cedar Rapids.
It'd be so fun if he does.
But then what's the question going to be when he, like, to me, it's like when he gets to double A, how's this all going to play out? And I
Yep.
think that'll happen this year. And obviously he'll get more opportunities after this year, but I think we're going to kind of see what sort of prospect he'll be. Tipping to impress, Jow, like I mentioned.
Yeah, Giles a good shout.
I'm extremely high on Kyle DeBarge. And I know you're like, but he just hit all the balls into the ground last year.
He did.
But I do think that he will, given his, the fact that he can now play a year that doesn't, it's so hard for college guys, right?
100%.
And so his first regular full season, I think it's just he's going to be the guy out of this group that it's going to be like, wow, he was a steal and perfect for this organization.
Yeah, I sure hope so. I'll just mention a couple of guys on the pitching side we haven't really talked about much at all, but I do think there's dudes worth mentioning. Charlie Soto, obviously his kind of peripherals under the hood numbers, if you will, were much better than his back of the baseball card numbers in 2024. He did quite well at I was going to say Fort Rapids, losing it, dude, at Fort Myers. Whole season in his age 18 season there. He's been up over 100, 101, I think, down in spring for the Twins. So when it warms up, look out for Charlie Soto. Ty Langenberg, who we had on the show a couple of weeks ago, was a great guest. Confident in what he's going to be able to do just because of how all in he was in his reflections on pitching development. And here's something I like to see, Jeremy. Last season for Langenberg, which was his first full professional season, 108 innings, 48 at Fort Myers, 60 at Cedar Rapids, struck out roughly a guy per inning, walks nobody, 328 FIP. Just really consistently posted, added velo. Fastball's been up to 96. I think some of the feedback on Langenberg we heard was needs to maintain that velocity start to start. Sometimes some fluctuations and inconsistencies there, but he's a guy who would I maybe expect to move up to Wichita fairly quickly if he continues his strong 2024 and 2025. And then Ross Dunn, got some good feedback on Ross Dunn and how his slider is looking. So maybe a guy to watch out for as a guy who might take a step forward, who had a little bit of an uneven 2024 and of course was caught up in the Derek Bender sign stealing mess shenanigan, of which we will not speak. Any other guys you want to talk about on Cedar Rapids, Jeremy, before we knock out Fort Myers?
No, I think we move on to the lowest affiliate.
Yeah, let's do it. Fort Myers Mighty Mussels, aka Fort Myers Miracle. Notable prospects on the pitching side. Dason Hill, left-handed pitcher, taken with the Twins. Let me get it right. Comp B pick in 2024. Michael Carpenter, their 11th rounder out of Madison Tech, who signed for 4th round money. Cade Bragg, another lefty. Hunter Hoops, who I highlighted because he's a free agent signee who throws 100. Dylan Questad, their 4th round pick from 2023, who had a really uneven first pro season in the Complex League. Ivan Romero is a guy who I wrote a story on, who I would encourage folks to check that out. And then Xander Sechrist, who was Tennessee's closer in their national championship run, who signed as a free agent after the draft. Notable catchers, Pancho Ruiz. We'll talk about him in a second. And then the infield crop of Fort Myers, Peyton Carr, a 2024 draftee, along with Jay Thomason, Demiri Pena, who is like a Luis Ariz starter kit. And then in the outfield at Fort Myers, Byron Churio, Yasser Mercedes, who had a great 2024 season, and Jose Rodriguez. Jeremy, your thoughts on Fort Myers roster?
Yeah, just a bunch of young dudes, right? The pitchers are a lot of the guys that were drafted last year or the year before. The one name that looking at the roster, Jack Doherty. I know we talked about him earlier, but he must be injured, right?
60-day IL, dude.
Yeah, so that's not
Such a bummer.
Yeah, not a promising thing. But I think the biggest thing on this roster is the lefty pitchers, right? The Twins don't have a ton of them in the organization from top to bottom, but Hill is going to be, on a lot of top 10 lists. I'm still big on Cade Bragg, even though he's relatively young, hasn't thrown a ton. And then you're real high on Michael Carpenter, and so those three lefties. There's a couple of lefties on the roster that are injured, but that to me, I'm a big fan of that. And then it's the international guys, right? So you mentioned Pena, who is, did you just call him the Luis Arraez starter kit?
Yeah,
isn't 20 yet, but just gets hits and 5'10", 150, so not really built like Luis Arraez. Arraez was carrying a little bit more weight. Arraez got hurt then at low A ball. I think he tore his ACL, ended up playing a lot of second base, was pretty slow. So just a different body. But the outfield is fun to me, right?
Yep.
Churio, Mercedes, Rodriguez, all 20 years old, or almost 20 years old. And I mentioned like one of these guys, maybe two of these guys, hopefully will pop off this year and move up. And there's been, guys and like Urbina in the past where he was highly touted and then isn't even in the organization anymore, I don't think. Like you'd hope that one or two of these outfielders really, like you mentioned, we're going to see a bunch of guys graduate, right? Who's going to fill in this gap? And this outfield is kind of where I look for something to happen. So young group may not be good at all. Like that's the hard part with this. You never really know. They're coming over from most of these guys from the DSL and playing stateside for the first time, or for the first full season anyway. And it's going to be an interesting start, because this is kind of where you can start to pay attention a little bit to how these guys are doing.
Yep. Agree with all of that. I think that outfield's going to strike out a lot, and it's going to be really fun. They're also going to hit a lot of home runs. Agree with that 100%. The Twins, to put it a different way, the Twins kind of minor league pipeline has been really on time. Like it's been just churning guys out. And so who's going to fill in the gaps at the bottom? Who's going to take a step forward? That's always a fun part of the Major League season for me. I want to talk about Peyton Carr real quick, because I think he's interesting. He's an interesting guy to look out for. And Peyton Carr was a senior sign, so they signed a couple of guys to save money. And Peyton Carr was one of those guys. As my computer freezes, good times. Peyton Carr was one of those guys. 4 years at High Point University, limited to only 27 games in 2024 due to just a string of injuries. Jeremy, 13 home runs in 27 games in 2024. Now, granted, that's not against like premium pitching and premium velocity, but he's an interesting lottery ticket guy where power is the calling card, and I think that's fun because that's maybe a little bit different from what the Twins like typical approach is. I do want to talk about one other guy on the position player side here, catcher, because David, who is the archivist for the Midwest League, who often sends us great questions, says, who's the third catcher for Cedar Rapids, and why didn't Pancho Ruiz move up? Pancho Ruiz is an elite baseball name, by the way. So Pancho Ruiz was signed as a free agent. He spent most of 2024 in Fort Myers, hit really well, 122 WRC plus. He hit 265, 367, 395. Kind of mostly like a gap-to-gap profile, walked a good amount, didn't strike out too much. He did move up at the end of 2024 and just really, really cratered at Cedar Rapids. Only 21 games, but just a 182, 286, 227 line. And so my guess is he's back to build back some confidence, get some at bats where it's warm, and then they'll give him another go at Cedar Rapids. And to answer the first question, who was the third catcher? Because they don't have a third catcher listed on their roster. My guess is Jaime Ferrer is the guy for now. He was a catcher in college, converted outfielder, and that would be one thing I'd be monitoring at Cedar Rapids because Kadeem Jow does have an extensive, unfortunately, injury history. So hoping that him and Baez can stay healthy. But I think Ferrer would be kind of like the emergency third catcher for Cedar Rapids. And then if one of the two main guys got hurt, they'd move someone up.
Yeah, and you see that quite a bit with these minor league teams where guys just kind of bounce around and fill gaps. One thing that we should mention is last week we talked about switching gears entirely, right? Because this is what you want to talk about.
Wait. Can we finish a couple more notes on Fort Myers real quick? Because I want to ask you a question about it.
Yes.
So you mentioned the lefties, right? We talked about Carpenter last week. He's been up to 96 in spring. Dason Hill has added significant velocity since the Twins got him. So I want to say when in the spring before he was drafted, and we're talking about like a really tall kid, right? Like he's like 6'5". I want to say 180, 175, 180 when he was drafted. Apologies if I got that wrong, but in that ballpark. And he was maybe touching mid 90s when he got drafted. He's been up to 99 in spring. And he's going to be in his age 19 season. And so you have, in some ways, a very similar profile, but in some ways, a very different profile to Charlie Soto, right? Where you have a high velocity prep arm going into their first full professional season, who's, by all accounts, shown some exciting developments since signing with the team. What would be your barometer of success for Hill in his first full pro season?
Stay healthy, take the ball every week, and throw strikes. Like it's so hard to judge anything off these games that are happening at this level. The bunch of guys that, like I mentioned, are playing baseball in the United States, many of them for their first full season of their careers. The amount of guys that play at single A that never move up is a high amount. So for Dason Hill, who's a top prospect, he's going to get every opportunity, but the barometer is, can he stay healthy so he can move up next year? Because he is, I would say, the top prospect on that roster. Ask all the other questions that we've talked about, like strengths and weaknesses and proving and impressing. It's so hard with a group like this, right? Because we don't know where the floor really is. Like Pena could hit 350 last year, and is he going to hit, like, if he hits 300, that'd be great. Yep. If he hits 215, I'm not going to be like, wow, that's shocking. It'd be disappointing, right? Yep. But there's just the range of outcomes is enormous.
Yep.
And so you really just hope these guys can stay healthy, and do well enough that they can get an opportunity to play Cedar Rapids next year.
100%.
And really do well enough so that when the draftees get added, that they don't lose their position in the organization, right? Because I mean that's essentially the next thing that happens. So
yep.
There are some fun names on there. There are a number of draft picks from this past year and from 2 years ago, and then a number of international guys that have been added. So Hill's going to be the most fun to watch. Mercedes, Rodriguez, and Pena, to me, are the three that kind of have something to prove because they have either cashed big checks or got people looking before. The Beltre outfielder,
Eduardo,
he'll
be complex.
Okay.
Him and Diber de Los Santos, which were the two big names from the 23 class, will both be complex league because they were both DSL last year. So they'll start complex, and then I suppose if Beltre crushes which I think we should pump the brakes on expecting him to do. Like, he had an incredible 2024 season, don't get me wrong, but there's going to be an adjustment moving stateside. But if he crushes, I suppose they would give whoever did well a shot for a couple of weeks at the end of the season in Fort Myers before they shut it down.
Yeah. The hard part, and maybe the times have changed now, but with both Miguel Sano and Jorge Polanco, they played well in the DSL and then moved them up to the Complex League at the end of the year, which put them over 90 active days, which counted as a full season. So not that it mattered for either of them, but neither of them would have qualified for a fourth option, which all international players typically do because they make it before their fifth full season. And so there's just some little stuff. And I know the calendars have changed and stuff like that. But there's sometimes where it makes sense to do things from a well, he's been really good perspective, where it doesn't make sense from a, is it worth losing a year of team control essentially to do that. So Fort Myers is just always hard. I mean, I'll check that box score, look for big things, but those are the wonkiest box scores too. And then the Complex League, when that starts, it's like there's just you never really know when these things are happening what to take out of it, because it's quite a collection of prospects.
Yep. I agree with you 100%. Stay healthy, throw strikes. That'd be great. And good luck to any prospect making their professional debut in the coming week. Sorry, man, I cut you off. So what did you want to talk about to round us out here?
Well, I mean, you're a draft guy, right?
Yep.
That's what gets you the most excited. So one name that showed up a lot on my Twitter timeline, and you can tell me if I'm wrong or if I'm not wrong, but we talked about Jace Lavalette last week and how he just wasn't getting it done. And every time I'm scrolling, I'm seeing multiple times this week of him hitting home runs. So I checked the box score. 3 home runs in the last handful of days. Now he's got 9. So is it a real thing that he's is he going to be back on the up arrow, or are we still trying to figure out what's going on?
That's such a good question. I don't really have a good answer, right? And so I think we talked about this a little bit last week with the 1-1 candidates, right? And we talked about Ethan Holiday and how Jackson was kind of a fringy first-round guy, and how Ethan started kind of at the top of the board, and then there were some questions about his hit tool, and they're possibly overcorrected for. Maybe that's true with Jace Laviolette too. I don't think that the criticisms I have, or the wonderings I have, are any less wonderings because he had a good week, right? To me, you're still talking about a guy who I don't know is going to stick in center field long term, is a power reliant profile, who has significant swing and miss and significant swing and miss in zone. And so don't get me wrong, he's still a really excellent prospect, but to me, I don't know if that's what I want to take at 1-1, and I could be hopelessly wrong. And we can all laugh at how wrong I was in 5 years, but good in my opinion that he's turned a corner. Texas A&M has had an absolutely horrible season. They were preseason consensus #1, and they've been a complete disaster. They might not even make the postseason. So good that he's turning it around. The college hitting class, in my opinion, still is an absolute mess. And I like all of the other demographics quite a bit more. So we can talk about that next week when we get into maybe a little bit of mock draft.
Do you have a new candidate for 1-1?
I think Jamie Arnold is the safest 1-1 bet if you had to place money, just because he hasn't necessarily hurt his chances. I think you could maybe go Billy Carlson. I think Seth Hernandez, the prep righty out of Corona, has a good shot. I know that's kind of a bold claim because prep righty going #1, but he's been up to 100. And so upside wise,
I'm trying to lead you on this one.
Oh,
because you texted me yesterday.
No.
What are we talking about with a prep lefty throwing 102 miles an hour?
Ridiculous. Yeah. So this kid went super viral yesterday. He's a left-hander out of Illinois. His name's Jack Bauer.
Of course it is.
shout out to anyone who remembers the TV show 24. 6'3", like 185, 190, just like really loose delivery. He threw a start the day before yesterday where he hit 101 6 times, 102 once. And this is an 18-year-old prep left-handed pitcher who's
In
committed
Illinois.
to Virginia. Yeah, who's in Illinois. Weirdly, a lot of good prep pitchers in Illinois. Cam Appenzeller is an Illinois kid too. So I don't know.
The thing was, when I saw that he was committed to Virginia, I'm like, oh, he's going to Virginia. He's not even going to get drafted because that's what Virginia guys do. They just say, sorry, I'm going to Virginia.
I don't know. If you're throwing like 102 mile per hour cheese as a prep lefty, I think someone might throw a big enough check at you to make you seriously reconsider that. But I feel you.
Look back over the last handful of years, the guys that have like withdrawn from the draft,
Yeah.
I think Virginia probably leads the numbers of guys that have just been like, sorry, we're not interested, which is weird, but that's one of those schools that's
they definitely get firm commitments for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
And like another school having an absolutely terrible season, in danger of not making the postseason. They were like preseason consensus number like 3-4. So we'll see. But I'll give the tease for next week, Jeremy, by saying left-handed pitching in this class is super fun, both the college side and the prep side. I'm gonna have two pieces, one on each in the next couple weeks of Just Baseball, just talking about some of the lefties because it's a good crop.
Let's go.
Okay, we'll be back this time next week, roughly. I think we're gonna do like a mini mock draft. So we might do like, when do the Twins pick? 16, something like that. Ought to know that. See,
later in 25 and 24, or in 26.
You're right. I think we're gonna do a mini mock next week and do like go through 20 picks. We won't do the whole first round, but we'll cover all the teams that we normally talk about and cover. And it will just be another way to get to know some more prospects in this draft beyond the candidates for 1-1 in what is a fruitless and pointless but fun thought exercise. So
totally fun.
We'll do that next week. We'll recap some notable minor league performances from the opening weekend. If you're a Twins fan, you've got Charlie Soto and Connor Prelip on Friday. Dason Hill definitely pitching this weekend. Zebby Matthews is back on Saturday for the Saints. So lots to look forward to there. Until then, thank you guys for supporting the show. We really appreciate it. We will catch you next week. Enjoy the baseball. Go Twins.